Hello, friends. We are interested in the geography of our views, so please like and write in the comments from which city are you watching us, and were there loud stories of betrayal in your city? Share your stories with us. Maybe the next betrayal story will be from your city. And we start. The fog hung over the suburban lawns like a thin veil hiding something elusive. John Peterson stopped the car in front of a new house 2-story with white shutters and a neatly trimmed lawn. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and something else, almost intangible, the beginning of a new life. He turned off the engine and looked at Claire sitting next to him. She smiled, but the smile seemed forced, as if her lips knew they had to portray joy, but her eyes had not yet decided whether to agree with it. "Well, here we are," John said, trying to keep his voice cheerful. "Our new start." Claire nodded, looking out the window. Her fingers fiddled with the edge of the scarf, and John noticed how she clutched the fabric a little tighter than necessary. He didn't say anything. "The last few months have been difficult. Quitting my job, moving from noisy Chicago, endless arguments about what to do next." This house in the suburbs of Boston became their compromise, an attempt to re-glue what was bursting at the seams. "Let's go have a look," Claire suggested, opening the car door. Her voice was light, almost playful, and John was surprised. She hasn't been like this for a long time. They walked out and John looked around the street. The houses stood in neat rows, each with its own character. Somewhere there were bright flower beds, somewhere there were children's bicycles on the porch. The street breathed a calmness that was so lacking in their previous life. The children, Emma and Lucas, had already jumped out of the car and were running around the lawn, laughing. Emma, 10 years old, was spinning around with her arms outstretched, and Lucas, 2 years younger, was trying to catch up with her. John smiled, but there was a pang in his chest. When was the last time he himself felt such lightness? Claire walked up to the porch, her heels clicking softly along the path. She stopped at the door and turned around, looking at John. There was something new in her gaze, not joy, not fatigue, but some kind of spark that he could not decipher. "Do you have the keys?" she asked. John patted his pocket and took out a bundle. Opening the door, he let Claire go ahead. The inside smelled of fresh paint and wood. The empty rooms seemed huge, their footsteps echoing. Claire walked into the living room, ran her hand along the windowsill, and looked out the window, beyond which she could see the neighboring house. "It will be good here," she said quietly, almost in a whisper. "I feel." John wanted to answer, but he was interrupted by Emma's clear voice. "Dad, can I choose my room?" "Of course, go look," he shouted back, and the children rushed off to the second floor with a stomp. Claire turned to him, her face softening. "They are happy," she said. "This is already something." John nodded, but other thoughts were running through his head. Claire was acting strange. It wasn't that she was cold or distant, on the contrary. There was some kind of energy in her that he hadn't seen since they first got married. But this energy seemed foreign, as if it did not belong to the Claire he had known for 15 years. They began unpacking, and by midday the house looked lived in. Boxes were piled in the corners, but the furniture had been arranged, and a coffee maker appeared in the kitchen. John was fiddling with his internet connection when there was a knock on the door. Claire, wiping her hands with a towel, went to open it. There were 2 people standing on the threshold, a man and a woman, both in their early 40s. The man, tall, with short dark hair and light gray hair at the temples, was holding a bottle of wine. The woman, slender, with brown curls, smiled so warmly that John couldn't help but smile back, although he didn't even know who they were. "Good afternoon." The woman said. Her voice was melodic, with a slight accent that John could not recognize. "We are your neighbors, Mark and Rachel. We live across the street. We decided to come in and get acquainted." "Oh, how sweet." Claire stepped forward, her face lighting up. "I'm Claire, and this is John, my husband. Come in, please." John rose from the floor, dusting off his hands. He shook Mark's hand, a firm, confident handshake, and nodded to Rachel. She looked at him with curiosity. Her eyes, green, with long eyelashes, seemed to be studying him. "We brought a small gift," Mark said, holding out the bottle. "Welcome to our little paradise." "Thank you." Claire took the wine, her fingers lingering on the label. This is so unexpected. We haven't even figured out where our glasses are. Rachel laughed. Oh, that's normal. We had the same thing when we moved 3 years ago. If anything, I can borrow a couple of glasses. They walked into the living room, and John noticed how Claire perked up even more. She joked, laughed, talked about moving, about how Lucas almost lost his stuffed dinosaur in the car. Mark and Rachel listened attentively, asked questions, and soon the conversation flowed easily, as if they had known each other for years. Mark turned out to be a lawyer working in downtown Boston. He spoke calmly, with slight irony, but in his tone one could feel the confidence of a man accustomed to keeping everything under control. Rachel was an artist whose work, according to Mark, hung in several local galleries. She talked about her paintings with such passion that John found himself thinking that he wanted to see them. "What do you do?" Mark asked, looking at John. John hesitated. The question he had hated for the past months. "I'm in a transitional period," he said, trying to smile. "I used to work in marketing, but now I'm looking for something new." Mark nodded without asking any questions, and John was grateful. Claire, as if feeling awkward, quickly changed the subject by asking Rachel about the local schools. The conversation became lively again, but John noticed how Mark looked at Claire not just politely, but with some kind of hidden interest. It was fleeting, but John felt a pang of irritation. The neighbors left an hour later, leaving behind a slight feeling of warmth and a bottle of wine on the table. Claire closed the door and turned to John, her eyes sparkling. "They're so nice, aren't they?" she said. "Looks like we're in a good place." "Yes," John answered, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong in this idyll. By evening, the house was filled with sounds. Emma was playing the piano they had brought from Chicago, Lucas was watching cartoons, and Claire was preparing dinner. John sat on the couch, scrolling through the news on his phone, but his eyes kept returning to his wife. She hummed something while chopping vegetables and looked happy. Too happy for a woman who just a month ago cried at night, thinking that he couldn't hear. He stood up and approached her. "Claire, is everything okay?" he asked quietly. She turned around, her eyebrows raised. "Certainly. And what? You're just different today." She smiled, but there was something subtly sharp in her smile. "Maybe I'm just glad we started again," she said, going back to cutting. "You should try it too, John." Her words hurt him, but he did not argue. Instead, he took the glasses and opened the bottle that Mark and Rachel had brought. The wine turned out to be tart, with a slight aftertaste of berries. They had a drink and Claire talked about her plans. Enrolling the kids in school, getting a job, maybe even doing yoga like Rachel. John listened, but his thoughts revolved around that look in Mark, that sparkle in Claire's eyes, the way she fiddled with her scarf in the morning. At night, lying in his new bedroom, John looked at the ceiling. Claire was sleeping next to her. Her breathing was even and calm. He turned to her, but in the darkness he saw only the outline of her face. Something had changed, and he didn't know if it was in her or himself. This house, this suburb, these neighbors, everything seemed perfect. But John knew that perfection always hides cracks, and he felt that these cracks had already begun to appear. A year has passed, and the suburb has become not just a new home for the Petersons, but a part of their lives. The street, which once seemed too well-groomed, was now familiar. John knew that on Saturdays Mr. Kelly from the neighboring yard mowed the lawn at exactly 8 in the morning, and Mrs. Hartman walked her terrier every evening. Emma and Lucas made friends. Their laughter was heard in the yard almost every day. Claire seemed to blossom. She found a job at the local library, signed up for an art course with Rachel, and acquired acquaintances that John barely had time to remember. Her energy, the same spark that alerted him on the day of the move, has now become familiar. But sometimes, in rare moments of silence, John caught himself thinking that he did not know what was hidden behind her smile. He got a job himself, not the one he dreamed of, but stable, in a small advertising firm in Boston. The morning began with coffee, the road to work with traffic jams, the evening with dinner and Claire's stories about her day. Life fell into a rut, but John could not shake the feeling that something was slipping away. Claire was there, but her thoughts, her real feelings seemed out of reach. That evening, everything was as usual. Claire was late at a meeting with her friends. The children were already asleep, and John decided to sort out the bag that she had left in the kitchen. This was her favorite bag, leather, shabby, with a bunch of pockets, which Claire called a black hole. He was looking for a phone charger when his fingers hit something hard. John pulled out a small flash drive, black, without any writing. He turned it over in his hands and frowned. Claire never mentioned the flash drive, and in general, she rarely used such things. She stored everything in the cloud. John sat down at the kitchen table, opened his laptop, and inserted a flash drive. A folder appeared on the screen with several video files named simply by numbers. As a 1, as a 2, as a 3. No clues, no marks. He hesitated, feeling anxiety building in his chest. It was someone else's, personal, but curiosity or something deeper, similar to a presentiment one. He clicked on the first file. The screen was filled with a bedroom illuminated by the soft light of a lamp. The camera stood motionless, as if someone had installed it on a shelf. John recognized the bedspread, the pillows. It was their bedroom, but not their home. This was Mark and Rachel's house. He saw it when he came to their barbecue last summer. His heart began to pound when Claire appeared in the frame. She was laughing, her hair was down, and her clothes were the same blouse she had worn on their anniversary. Mark stood opposite her, his hand on her waist. They spoke, but the words could not be heard. The recording was without sound. And then they kissed, slowly, confidently, like people for whom this is not the first time. John froze. His fingers gripped the edge of the table. His breathing became heavy. He wanted to stop the video, but his hand did not obey. The shots changed. Claire and Mark, their movements, their closeness. This was not just betrayal. It was a scene filmed with a kind of cold, almost staged precision. When the video ended, John sat staring at the black screen. There was a lump in my throat and an emptiness in my head. He opened the next file. This time, the place was different, an unfamiliar room with large windows. Claire was there, but not with Mark. A man John didn't know, tall, with a tattoo on his shoulder, was hugging her. They laughed. Their gestures were relaxed, intimate. John closed the file without looking through it. The third file is Claire and a woman he recognizes. It was Linda, Rachel's friend who often attended their parties. Fourth, Claire and Rachel. The fifth entry is Mark again, but with another woman, not Claire. John pulled the flash drive out of the laptop and clenched it in his fist. His hands were shaking, but he felt neither anger nor pain, only numbness. This was not just betrayal. It was a whole network, a web in which Claire was not a victim, but an active participant. He tried to remember when he noticed the changes in her, but realized that they had always been there, in her sudden liveliness, in her new friends, in her evasive answers to simple questions. He put the flash drive in his pocket and closed the laptop. Claire returned an hour later, her cheeks pink from the cool air and her eyes sparkling. She threw her bag on the chair and kissed John on the cheek. "Sorry, I'm late," she said, taking off her coat. Linda talked about her trip to Italy. I listened. John nodded, his face unreadable. He looked at her, trying to see the woman he loved, but he saw only a stranger. Her voice, her movements, everything seemed alien. He wanted to ask, he wanted to scream, but the words were stuck. What could he say? How to start a conversation about something that destroyed everything he considered his life? "Tired?" Claire asked, noticing his silence. She came closer. Her hand touched his shoulder. "Are you okay?" "Yes," he answered, his voice smooth, almost mechanical. "It's just a long day." She smiled, and in that smile John saw what he had previously taken for warmth. Now she seemed like a mask behind which something incomprehensible was hidden. Claire went into the bathroom, and he remained sitting, clutching the flash drive in his pocket. He didn't know what to do next. Should I tell her? Leave? Talk to Mark? Every decision felt like a trap. He didn't sleep that night. Claire lay next to her. Her breathing was calm, as if the world around her was not collapsing. John looked at the ceiling, and frames from the flash drive flashed before his eyes. He thought about how blind he was, how he didn't notice the hints. Parties that Claire went to alone, her long walks with Rachel, her sudden passion for new hobbies. It all added up to a picture he refused to see. But what scared him most was not betrayal. What scared him was that he still loved her. Even now, knowing the truth, he couldn't just erase it from his life. This thought was the worst of all. It made him weak, vulnerable, a man who clings to an illusion even when it crumbles to dust. In the morning, Claire went to work, and John stayed at home. He took out the flash drive and inserted it into the laptop again. Not to review the notes, he couldn't. He wanted to understand what this meant. Was it her secret that she was keeping? Or did someone else know? Maybe Mark, Rachel, Linda. He opened the folder and noticed that the files were created at different times, some several months ago, others just a couple of weeks. This was not a one-time thing, not impulsive. It was a system. John closed the laptop and hid the flash drive in his desk drawer. He decided he wouldn't say anything for now. Not because I was afraid, not because he wanted to protect her. He just didn't know who he was now, a husband, a victim, an observer. He needed time to figure out how to live with this knowledge, and perhaps to understand who Claire has become. John woke up with the feeling that the world around him had become thinner, as if reality had turned into a fragile shell, ready to crack at the slightest touch. He lay in bed, looking at Claire sleeping. Her face, calm and serene, now seemed alien to him. The flash drive, hidden in the desk drawer, burned his thoughts like a hot coal. He could not get out of his head those frames, those scenes that turned everything he knew about his wife, about his life. But the anger he expected did not come. Instead, there was emptiness, cold, viscous, like the fog over their suburb. He decided not to talk to Claire. Not now. Not because he was afraid of her reaction or what she would say. John just didn't trust himself. What will he do? Will he scream? Will he leave? Forgive? Each of these decisions seemed wrong, premature. He wanted to understand. Not only why Claire did this, but also how far this web went, who else was entangled in it, how long it had been weaving behind his back. He felt like a detective in his own life, and it was both humbling and strangely exciting. In the morning, when Claire went to work and the children ran off to school, John sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee already cold. He took out a notepad and began to write down everything he knew. Names: Mark, Rachel, Linda, unknown man with tattoo. Places: Mark and Rachel's house, that unfamiliar room with the big windows. Dates: the files on the flash drive spanned almost a year, with breaks of several weeks. He tried to find a pattern, but his thoughts were confused. Why did Claire keep these notes? Was this her idea, or did someone else film it? And if so, why? John decided to start with what he could control: observation. He wasn't a spy. He didn't know how to spy on people, but his instinct told him that the answers lay not in conversations, but in what Claire and her entourage did when they thought no one was watching. He started small. He began to monitor her schedule more closely. Claire was always organized. Her days were scheduled. Work in the library from 9 to 3, painting classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays, meetings with friends on Fridays. But now John noticed gaps, hours when she returned later than promised, or left on business without specifying where. The first step was to stake out Mark and Rachel's house. John chose the evening when Claire had gone to a book club meeting. He knew it could be a lie, but he didn't stop her. Instead, he waited until she left the house, putting on a dark jacket and cap. I felt ridiculous, like the hero of a cheap thriller, but it was too late to retreat. He crossed the street and stopped at a tall cedar tree that grew opposite the neighbor's house. From there was a view of their porch and the living room windows, partially covered with curtains. The lights were on in Mark and Rachel's house, but nothing out of the ordinary was happening. John waited, his breath mixing with a cool air. Half an hour later, he saw a car pull up, not Claire, but Linda. She came out holding a bottle of wine and entered the house without ringing the bell. The door opened as if someone had been waiting for her. John tensed. Linda was in one of the videos. Her presence here, in Mark and Rachel's house, could not be accidental. He took out his phone and took a few pictures, trying not to attract attention. An hour later, another car pulled up, and John recognized the driver, the same man with a tattoo he had seen on the flash drive. The man entered the house as confidently as Linda. John felt his heart beat faster. This was not just a meeting of neighbors. It was something planned and organized. But where was Claire? He returned home when his feet started to freeze and checked Claire's phone through the app they had installed for the kids. She hadn't turned off geolocation, and John saw that her phone was in downtown Boston, in the area where the trendy bar she'd once mentioned was located. This was not a book club. He sat on the sofa, clutching his phone, and tried to breathe evenly. Claire lied, but that was expected. The question was, how far had she gone? The next day, John began to follow Mark. This turned out to be more difficult. Mark worked downtown, and John couldn't just quit his job to spy. But he noticed that Mark often stayed at the office late, and Rachel, on the contrary, rarely left home after 6. John decided to use it. He came up with an excuse. He asked Mark for advice about a new job. Supposedly, he needed a lawyer's opinion. Mark, as always, was friendly and suggested we meet at a cafe not far from his office. The meeting went smoothly. Mark talked about contracts, about the job market, about how Boston is different from Chicago. John nodded, but his eyes followed every gesture, every glance. Mark looked relaxed, but John noticed him double-checking his phone when the text arrived. It was fleeting, but John managed to see the sender's name, Linda. Mark quickly put the phone away and continued the conversation, but John felt that he had hit the nail on the head. After the meeting, he stayed in the cafe, ordered more coffee, and opened his laptop. John wasn't a hacker, but he knew how to search for information. He started with social networks. Mark's page was boring photos of Rachel, posts about local events, a few vacation snaps. Rachel published more. Her paintings, scenes from the studio, photos from parties. John scrolled through her posts over the past months and noticed that Claire appeared on them more often than he thought. They were together at exhibitions, on picnics, even at some kind of master class on ceramics. But something about these photographs alarmed him, not the pictures themselves, but the comments. Linda, Mark, and other acquaintances left emojis and jokes that seemed innocent, but now, after the flash drive, they looked like a code, like hints of something hidden. John went to Linda's page. She was less active, but her photographs were more frank: parties, cocktails, pictures in revealing dresses. In one of them, she stood next to a man with a tattoo, and John felt his fingers curl into fists. He saved the photo and continued searching. An hour later, he found the profile of a man. His name was Nathan. He was a trainer at a local gym. Nothing unusual, but John noticed that Nathan often liked Claire, Rachel, and Linda's posts. This was not a causal connection. They were all part of the same circle. John spent the following days in suspense. He kept an eye on Claire, but did it carefully so that she wouldn't become suspicious. He noticed little things: the way she checked her phone when she thought he wasn't looking, how her smile becomes a little sharper when he asks about her plans, how she avoids talking about Mark and Rachel, even though she used to mention them all the time. He also kept an eye on his neighbor's house, taking notes on who was coming and going. Nathan showed up there twice in a week, Linda 3 times. One day, he saw Rachel and Claire leaving the house together, laughing, their hands touching a little longer than necessary. John began to suspect that it was not just a matter of cheating. The flash drive, the recordings, their quantity and quality, all this pointed to something more. He remembered Mark once mentioning that he was doing something out of the ordinary, outside of practicing law. It had sounded like a joke at the time, but now John wasn't sure. Was it some kind of network, club, or something even darker? He didn't know, but he felt the answers were close. One evening, when Claire left for another meeting, John made up his mind. He took a flashlight, put on dark clothes, and headed towards Mark and Rachel's house. He knew that they were not at home. He saw them leave an hour ago. The street was quiet. Only the distant barking of a dog broke the silence. John walked around the back of the house. where there was a small garden separated by a low fence. He had no intention of breaking in, but wanted to see if there was anything that might provide a clue. It was dark in the garden, but John noticed that the basement window was slightly open. He crouched down and shined a flashlight. Inside there were boxes and an old sofa, but nothing suspicious. He was about to leave when a beam of light fell on something metallic. It was a camera, small, professional, with a lens aimed at the sofa. John froze. His heart was beating so loudly that he was afraid he would be heard. This was not a random find. A camera like the one that shot video on a flash drive. He didn't touch anything, but took a few pictures with his phone. When he returned home, his hands were shaking. He sat down at the table, opened his laptop, and began looking for information about the cameras, how they could be connected to the recordings. He was not an expert, but he found forums where similar devices were discussed. They were used for covert filming, for broadcasting, sometimes for blackmail. This thought struck him like lightning. Blackmail or something else. John closed his laptop and put his phone away. He knew he couldn't just watch anymore. He needed to decide what to do next. A confrontation with Claire was inevitable, but he wanted to be prepared. He wanted to know everything who else was involved, how far it had gone, why his wife, the woman he loved, had become a part of it. But for now, he remained silent, collecting pieces of the puzzle, which became darker every day. John sat in the semi-darkness of the living room, the light from the table lamp snatched out of the darkness only by his hands, clutching a cup of cold coffee. Outside the window, the suburbs were sleeping. Its silence seemed deceptive, like a mask hiding a storm. The last days merged into an endless series of night vigils, searches, notes that he hid in an old shoebox. The flash drive, the camera in Mark and Rachel's basement, the faces in the photographs, all this was just the tip of the AI. Esberg, and John felt himself sinking into waters too deep and cold to emerge unscathed. But he could no longer stop. His observations of Claire, Mark, and their circle of acquaintances began to bear fruit, but not the ones he expected. He expected to find evidence of betrayal, perhaps evidence of some personal betrayal, but instead he found a system carefully constructed, almost invisible to outsiders. This was not just a deception, not a casual relationship. It was a club, a network where each participant was both predator and prey, and the more John learned, the more clearly he realized that his life, his marriage, his home were all just part of someone else's game. It all started with a camera that he noticed in his neighbor's basement. After that night, John could not sleep. His thoughts revolved around one question. Why? Why would someone set up a camera in the basement, film scenes that then end up on a flash drive in his wife's bag? He began to look for answers, but not in conversations. He was still not ready for a confrontation with Claire. Instead, he dug deeper, using everything he could. The internet, observations, even careful questioning of acquaintances. The first breakthrough happened by accident. John noticed that Mark often went into the center of Boston in the evenings, always to the same area, an elite neighborhood with expensive mansions and private clubs. One day, under the pretext of work, John followed him. He parked to the side, watching Mark enter a nondescript building with a black door and a small sign with nothing on it except the number 47. John took a photo and began searching for information about the place. The building was officially owned by a private equity firm, but rumors circulated online about private parties for a select few. No details, just hints that disappeared as soon as he tried to dig deeper. He returned to the photographs he had collected over weeks of surveillance. Linda, Nathan, Rachel, Claire, they all appeared in the photographs with the same people. Men and women whose faces John began to remember. He began looking for them on social networks, in the news, in any open sources. The names emerged one after another, and each discovery struck like a hammer blow. A district court judge he saw at a local fundraiser. A prosecutor whose face appeared in reports about high-profile cases. A businessman who owns a chain of clinics in Massachusetts. A doctor whom Claire once referred to as a good specialist. These people were not random neighbors. They were part of something bigger, and their connections extended far beyond the suburbs. John began to suspect that this was more than just a group of friends throwing secret parties. The video on the flash drive, the camera, their behavior, everything pointed to a system where each participant plays a role. He remembered how Mark once said, laughing, that in this city everyone knows each other and everyone owes each other. It sounded like a joke at the time, but now John saw a hidden meaning in these words. He began looking for information about partner exchange clubs, secret societies, anything that could explain what he saw. And the more he read, the clearer it became. This is not just entertainment. This is blackmail. He found an old forum where anonymous users discussed such networks. One of the posts described a scheme. Participants, often influential people, join a closed club where they exchange partners, film everything, and then use the recordings as leverage. If someone wants to get out, they blackmail him with incriminating evidence. If someone breaks the rules, the records fall into the hands of those who can destroy careers, reputations, and lives. John felt his throat tighten. Claire was part of it. Not just a participant, but, judging by the number of videos, an active link. He started checking her phone while she was sleeping. It was low, but John no longer thought about morality. He found correspondence with Mark, Linda, Nathan, and others. The messages were short, often encrypted. Meeting in 47, bring your own, don't forget the rules. No obvious hints, but John knew what it was about. He also noticed that Claire often sent files through a secure application that he could not open. This only confirmed his suspicions. The records were not just stored, they were distributed. One evening, when Claire left for another meeting, John decided to take a desperate step. He knew Mark and Rachel were home, but he ventured back to their basement. This time he was more careful. He put on gloves and took a small set of tools that he found in the garage. The basement window was still slightly open, as if no one was worried about safety. John carefully got inside, trying not to touch anything. The camera was still there, but now there was an external hard drive next to it, connected to a small device that looked like a router. He did not touch the disk, but photographed everything he could. In the corner of the basement, he noticed a box of documents. John opened it and froze. Inside were folders with names. Not everyone knew each other, but he recognized some: the judge, the prosecutor, the doctor. In one of the folders was a photograph of Claire, attached to a sheet of paper with her information, address, work, even information about her children. His heart began to pound. It wasn't just a game. It was a network where every participant was under control. Everyone knew that they could be destroyed. John emerged from the basement, feeling sweat running down his back. He returned home and hid the pictures in an encrypted folder on his laptop. Now he knew what he was dealing with, but this knowledge did not bring relief. On the contrary, it made everything worse. Claire didn't just cheat on him, she was part of a machine that was grinding lives, careers, families. And he, John, was a blind cog in this machine, a husband who did not notice anything until his world collapsed. He began to think about how to get out of this situation. Tell Claire what he knows? Go to the police? But what will he say? He only had pictures, a flash drive, and guesses. And against him are people with power, money, connections. Judges, prosecutors, businessmen. They are not just participants, they protect this network. John remembered seeing the judge once at Mark and Rachel's party. He seemed ordinary, even boring, but now John realized that there was something else hidden behind his smile. He decided to dig further. The next day, he took a day off from work and went to the center of Boston, to building number 47. During the day, it looked even more inconspicuous. Glass doors, security, a sign with the name of the company. John pretended to be a courier to get in, but was not allowed further than the lobby. However, he noticed surveillance cameras and people entering the building. One of them was the doctor he had seen in the photographs. The other is a woman whose face has been in the news as a partner in a large law firm. John returned home and began to map the connections. He drew names, arrows, dates, trying to figure out who was in charge. Mark, Rachel, or someone he didn't know yet. He also began to think about Claire. Why did she get involved in this? Was she a victim who was dragged in, or did she deliberately choose this path? He remembered their marriage, their quarrels, her tears, her sudden liveliness after moving. Maybe she was looking for a way out of her routine, or was she blackmailed like others? But the video, her behavior, her confidence, everything said that she was not a victim. One night, while Claire was sleeping, John checked her phone again. He found a new message from Mark. Tomorrow in 47. Don't be late. New rules. John felt his fingers tighten. He wanted to burst into the bedroom, wake her, and demand answers. But instead, he took a screenshot and put the phone away. He knew that direct conversation would achieve nothing. Claire will either lie or tell the truth, which will ruin everything, and he was not ready for this yet. Instead, he decided to take a risk. He wanted to get into Building 47 to see what was happening inside. He didn't know how to do this, but he felt that this was his only chance to understand how far this network had gone and how to get Claire or himself out of it. He started looking for information about the company that owned the building and found the name of the owner, a businessman whose face he had seen at one of the parties. It was another piece of the puzzle, but John knew that it was becoming increasingly dangerous to put them together. He looked at the sleeping Claire, and love and disgust fought in his chest. She was his wife, the mother of his children, but now she was also part of something he couldn't understand. And the deeper he plunged into this mystery, the more clearly he understood. There may be no way out. For her, for him, for them. The silence in the Peterson house became almost tangible, like cold air before a storm. John felt her every evening, sitting at dinner with Claire and the children, when her smile seemed too precise and his own words sounded mechanical. He knew that she noticed his distance, his glances that lingered on her a little longer than necessary. Claire was smart, observant, and John understood that his attempts to hide his suspicions could not go unnoticed. But he continued to remain silent, collecting pieces of the mosaic, which became darker every day. The flash drive, the camera in the basement, the names of influential people, the building with number 47, all this was real, but John still did not know how to approach the truth without destroying his life. Claire, on the other hand, acted as if nothing had changed. She cooked breakfast, laughed with the children, talked about her work in the library, but John saw how her fingers trembled slightly when she poured coffee, how her eyes avoided him when he asked too direct a question. She knew he suspected something, and this knowledge, like an invisible wall, grew between them. That all changed on Friday night. The children were staying with friends for the night. The house seemed unusually empty. Claire returned home later than usual, her cheeks slightly flushed, and in her hands was a bottle of wine, which she placed on the kitchen table. John sat in the living room, scrolling through the news on his laptop, but his mind was far away. He closed the screen when she entered and looked at her. Her smile was soft, almost tender, but there was something new in it, uncertainty mixed with determination. "Let's have a drink," she suggested, taking out glasses. "We haven't spent an evening together for a long time." John nodded, although his chest tightened. He felt that this was not just a desire to relax. Claire wanted to say something, and he was afraid to hear what it was. They sat down at the table. The wine turned out to be tart, with a slight aftertaste of prunes. Claire took a sip and looked at him, her eyes sparkling in the lamplight. "John, you've been kind of distant lately," she began. Her voice was calm, but there was a sense of caution in it. "Did something happen?" He froze, his fingers gripping the stem of his glass. This was the moment he had been waiting for and dreading. He could have told everything about the flash drive, about the camera, about her correspondence, about Building 47, but instead he shook his head. "Just work," he lied. "A lot of stress." Claire tilted her head, her gaze becoming more attentive. She put the glass on the table and moved closer. "You know you can talk to me, right?" she said. "We have always been honest with each other." This word, honest, cut him like a knife. He looked into her eyes, trying to find in them at least a hint of repentance, but he saw only the same spark that appeared on the day of the move. John swallowed and forced himself to smile. "Of course," he answered, but his voice was hoarse. Claire was silent for a few seconds, then her hand fell on his. Her fingers were warm, but John felt cold. I want you to be happy, she said quietly. We both deserve it. Life here, in this place, it may be different, more free. John frowned, not understanding what she was getting at. Claire took another sip of wine, as if gathering her courage. I know that you have noticed how I have changed, she continued, and I want to be frank with you. There is a community, people who live differently. They are not constrained by rules and are not afraid of their desires. It's liberating, John. It's like taking a deep breath after years in a cage. His heart began to pound. She was talking about the club. Without naming it directly, without revealing details, but that was it. John felt the blood rush to his temples. He wanted to scream, to ask how she could, but instead he remained silent, letting her continue. Mark, Rachel, Linda, they're all part of this, Claire said, her voice quieter but more confident. Me too. This isn't about cheating, John. It's about freedom, about being yourself. I want you to try. With us. Her words hung in the air, heavy as lead. John looked at her, trying to comprehend what she was suggesting. Draw him into this network, into this web of blackmail and lies that he has unearthed. He felt nauseous, but his face remained motionless. Are you serious? He asked. His voice was even, but everything was boiling inside. Claire nodded, her eyes searching for his reaction. It's not what you think, she said. It's not dirty, it's not low. It's like a new level of intimacy. We could be in this together, completely open to each other. John pushed his glass away, his hands shaking. He saw how she looked at him with hope, with slight fear, but without a trace of guilt. She believed what she said, or at least she wanted to believe. Claire, he began, trying to keep his voice under control. Do you understand what you are offering me? Do you want me to join your parties? What are you doing behind my back? Her face trembled, but she quickly pulled herself together. It's not behind your back, she replied. I want you to be a part of this. I don't want secrets. Secrets? He couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. You kept the flash drive with the video, Claire. With you, with Mark, with others. Are these not secrets? Her eyes widened, and for a second John saw panic in them. She didn't expect him to know. But Claire quickly recovered. Her voice became firmer. Have you been rummaging through my things? She asked, but there was no resentment in her tone, only cold clarity. I found the truth, he replied, and I know more than you think. It's not just community, Claire. This is blackmail. Judges, prosecutors, businessmen, they are all in it, and you shoot everything to keep each other in line. Claire was silent, her face became paler. She looked at him as if she was seeing him for the first time, and John realized that he had offended her. But he didn't stop. You got yourself into this, he said, and now you want to drag me in so that I can become just like you? How are they? You don't understand, she interrupted, her voice trembling. This is not blackmail. This is protection. We are all equal. Nobody can go out because everyone knows about each other. It sets us free, John. No one will judge. No one will betray. Free? He stood up. His voice became louder. It's a cage, Claire. Don't you see? They keep you on the hook. And you want me to wear the same collar? Claire stood up too, her eyes burning. Do you think you're better? She said. You live in your own little world where everything should be perfect. But life isn't like that, John. I'm tired of pretending. I want to live, not exist. Their argument was cut short when there was a knock on the door. John froze, his gaze darting to the window. Mark stood on the porch, his silhouette clear in the light of the street lamp. Claire looked at John, her face softening, but there was determination in it. I called him, she said quietly. I thought he would help explain. John felt his fists clench. He didn't want to see Mark, didn't want to hear his voice, but Claire had already gone to open the door. Mark entered, his face was calm, but his eyes were attentive, like those of a predator assessing its prey. John, he said, holding out his hand, which John ignored. Claire told me about your conversation. I thought I'd clear things up. Clarify what? John stepped forward, his voice low and threatening. Why are you sleeping with my wife? Why are you all filming this and blackmailing each other? Mark didn't flinch. He smiled, but there was no warmth in his smile. You saw more than you should have, he said. And that's a problem, John. People in our circle, they don't like it when someone sticks their nose into someone else's business. That's my business, John snapped. This is my wife, my life. Mark nodded as if agreeing, but his tone became harsher. You've already seen too much, he said, and you have a choice. Join us, become a part of it, or the consequences will be unpleasant. For you, for Claire, for your children. The threat hung in the air, heavy as a blow. John looked at Claire, but she looked away. Her silence was louder than words. She knew Mark would say this. She knew and called him anyway. Get out of my house, John said, his voice quiet but ringing with steel. Mark shrugged, but his eyes never left John. Think about it, he said. You don't have much time. When the door closed behind him, John turned to Claire. She stood with her arms crossed, her face unreadable. Did you hear what he said? Asked John. Is this what you wanted? To intimidate me? I wanted you to understand, she replied. This is not a game, John. This is our life now, and you're either with us or... She didn't finish, but John knew what she meant. He turned and went into the bedroom, leaving her alone. That night he did not sleep. His thoughts swirled around one thing, how to get out of this trap without losing everything. But with each passing hour, he realized that there might be no way out. Tuesday morning began with a sharp knock on the door. John, still recovering from a sleepless night, went downstairs, his steps echoing loudly in the empty house. Claire left for work, the children were at school, and he was left alone with thoughts that burned like a hot iron. The knocking was repeated, persistent, almost threatening. John opened the door and saw two policemen, a man with tired eyes and a woman whose face was as impenetrable as a mask. John Peterson? The man asked. His voice was even, but there was a heaviness in it. John nodded, his throat dry. He didn't know what to expect, but instinct told him that this was more than just a courtesy call. We need to ask you a few questions, the woman continued, her hand resting on the folder she was holding. Can I come in? John stepped back to let them into the living room. They sat down and the woman opened the folder, pulling out a photograph. It was a young woman with dark hair. Her face was covered in bruises. Her lip was split. John frowned, not understanding who she was and why her photo was in the hands of the police. Do you know this woman? Asked the man. Her name is Sarah Mills. John shook his head, his heart beating faster. The name was unfamiliar, the face too. But something in their gaze, in the way they looked at him, made him tense. No, he answered. I've never seen her. The police looked at each other. The woman moved the photo closer. She claims you attacked her, she said. Last Friday, around 10 o'clock in the evening. Say you were at a bar in downtown Boston, got into an argument, and you hit her. John felt the air leave his lungs. Friday. He was home, alone, after an argument with Claire and a visit from Mark. He didn't go out, he didn't go to the bar, he didn't know any Sarah Mills. But the words of the police sounded like a sentence. It's a mistake, he said, trying to keep his voice calm. I wasn't in the bar, I was at home. Do you have any witnesses? The man asked, his tone almost sympathetic, but his eyes remained cold. John opened his mouth, but remained silent. There were no witnesses. Claire returned late. The children were with friends. He was alone, and that made him vulnerable. He shook his head, feeling the ground disappear from under his feet. We'll check your version, the woman said, closing the folder. But Sarah applied. This is a serious charge, Mr. Peterson. We will contact you. They left, leaving behind a silence that seemed louder than any noise. John stood in the middle of the living room, his hands shaking. This was not just a police visit. It was a trap, and he knew who had set it. Mark. Club. They weren't kidding when they threatened consequences. He remembered Mark's words, "You've seen too much." Now they hit where he was weak in his reputation, in his life. John sat down on the couch, his thoughts racing. Sarah Mills. Who is she? Why is she lying? He opened his laptop and started searching for her name on the internet. Half an hour later, he found her profile on a social network. A young woman, about 30, worked as an administrator in one of the Boston galleries. Her face did not evoke any associations, but John noticed that she was friends with Rachel. This couldn't be a coincidence. He saved photos of her and began looking for connections, but the more he dug, the more he realized that this was planned. Sarah was part of their network, a pawn they used to pin him down. Claire returned home in the evening. Her face was tired, but she smiled when she saw John. He looked at her, trying to see if she knew what was happening. Her behavior did not change. She was preparing dinner, asking about his day, but John felt that she was avoiding his gaze. He didn't say anything about the police. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how to start. She was part of it, and her reaction could be anything from a lie to a confession that he wasn't ready to hear. The next day, things got worse. This morning, John received a letter from his boss. Short, official. We have received information about a possible incident involving you. Until the situation becomes clearer, we are forced to suspend you from work. John reread the letter 3 times, his fingers clenching into fists. This was not just a blow to his reputation, it was an attempt to ruin his life. Without a job and accused of violence, he became an outcast. And he knew that this was just the beginning. In the evening, the school called. The director, a soft-spoken woman, asked John to come in for a meeting. "It's nothing serious," she said, "but we received a complaint from a parent. We want to discuss." John realized that the complaint was related to the same thing. Someone, perhaps Mark, perhaps someone in their circle, was spreading rumors to isolate him. He felt the walls closing in around him, the air getting thicker, making it harder to breathe. He didn't sleep that night. I lay there looking at the ceiling and thought about how quickly everything was falling apart. He was alone against a system that knew how to destroy. Claire slept next to her. Her breathing was even, but John no longer saw her as a wife. She was part of this machine, and her silence, her attempt to involve him in the club, only confirmed this. In the morning, there was a knock on the door again. This time it was Mark. He stood on the porch, dressed in a dark coat. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp as blades. John didn't want to let him in, but Mark didn't give him a choice. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. John closed the door, his fists clenching. He was ready to strike, but knew that it would not solve anything. Mark sat down on the sofa. His posture was relaxed, but there was a sense of power in it. "You're in trouble, John," he began, his voice almost friendly. "Police, work, school. This is not an accident. Do you understand why this is happening?" John was silent, his gaze fixed on Mark. He didn't intend to play these games. "You can fix everything," Mark continued. "All you need to do is stop resisting. Join us tomorrow evening at Judge Walter's mansion. There will be an event. You will come and all your problems will disappear. The police will fall behind, work will return, and the rumors will stop." "What if I refuse?" John asked, his voice low, almost a growl. Mark smiled, but there was no warmth in his smile. "Then things will get worse," he said. "Sarah Mills is just the beginning. We have the tapes, John. Not just with Claire, with you. Your walks, your surveillance. We can make you look not just like a rapist, but something worse. Do you want this? For yourself, for Emma and Lucas." The mention of children hit John like lightning. He stepped forward, but Mark didn't even flinch. "Don't do anything stupid," he said. "You can't stop us, but you can be part of it. This is your only option." Mark left, leaving behind a silence that rang in his ears. John sat up, his hands shaking. He knew Mark wasn't bluffing. They framed the accusation with Sarah. They could have framed anything. They had connections, money, power. Judge Walter, the prosecutor, the businessmen, they were all part of this network, and John was a threat to them. But not too big to destroy it. They wanted his submission. He thought about Claire. Did she know? Was she part of this plan? Her attempt to involve him in the club, her words about freedom, all this now seemed like part of the script. But deep down, John still hoped that she was not like that, that she had been dragged in, that she was a victim like him. This hope was weak, but it kept him from completely breaking down. He spent the whole day in a daze. He didn't go to school and didn't answer calls from work. He sat in the living room, looking at a photo of him and Claire and the kids on the beach 2 years ago. Their smiles, their happiness now seemed so distant, almost fictional. He wanted to go back there, but knew it was impossible. By evening, he made a decision. He will go to the event at the judge's mansion. Not because I wanted to, not because he believed Mark. He will go to understand how far this network has gone and find a way to destroy it. He knew it was dangerous, that he could lose everything. But he had no choice. The trap had slammed shut, and now he could either fight or give up. Claire returned late, her eyes were tired, but she smiled when she saw him. John looked at her, trying to find in her at least a hint of truth, but he saw only a mask. He didn't tell her about Mark, about the police, about his decision. He simply nodded when she asked if everything was okay, but inside he felt something dying: trust, love, hope. Everything that held them together was now at risk, and he knew that tomorrow evening, in the judge's mansion, he would either find answers or lose himself forever. Judge Walter's mansion towered above the dark street. Its windows glowed with a soft golden light, as if there was not an electric light burning inside, but something living, pulsating. John stood at the entrance, his fingers clutching the invitation, a black envelope with a silver seal that Mark had given him that morning. It only had his name and address on it, no hint of what awaited inside. He put on a dark suit and mask, as indicated in the note, but he felt not like a guest, but like a hostage being led to the scaffold. The mask, black, with thin silver patterns, hid his face, but could not stop the trembling in his hands. The entrance was guarded by two men in identical dark suits, their faces inscrutable. One of them checked the invitation, nodded, and stepped back to let John through. The door opened, and he was enveloped in warm air, saturated with the aromas of expensive perfume, wine, and something else elusive, almost animal. Inside, the mansion was huge, with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and walls hung with heavily framed paintings. But all this paled in front of the people dozens of masked figures, whose movements were both graceful and predatory. John stepped forward, trying to remain confident. The guests were talking, their voices merging into a low hum, but the words were difficult to make out. The masks hid their faces, but not their emotions. The eyes, visible through the slits, burned with a mixture of excitement, greed, and fear. Men in tuxedos, women in dresses that cost more than his year's salary, moved around the room like actors on stage, playing roles that John did not yet understand. He spotted a bar in the corner and headed there, hoping a glass of something strong would help him get his bearings. The bartender, also wearing a mask, silently poured whiskey. John took a sip, feeling the warmth spreading through his chest, but the tension did not go away. He looked around the room, trying to find Claire, Mark, or someone he knew. But the masks made everyone strangers. A woman in a red dress with a golden mask walked by. Her gaze lingered on him, but she did not stop. A man with gray temples, whose mask resembled a bird's head, spoke to two others, their laughter harsh, almost unnatural. John felt like a stranger, caught in a world where the rules were not explained to him. His thoughts were interrupted by a voice behind him. "New guy?" asked the man. His mask was black, with golden wings at his temples. The voice was low, with a slight hoarseness, but John did not recognize it. "You could say that," he answered, trying to sound neutral. The man smiled, his teeth glinting in the light of the chandelier. "Don't be afraid," he said. "Everyone here is nervous at first. But then you will understand why you came." John didn't answer, but his fingers tightened around his glass. The man walked away, disappearing into the crowd, and John felt his heart beating faster. He began to walk around the hall, trying to stay in the shadows, but his eyes were looking for details, gestures, voices, anything that could give a clue. He noticed a staircase leading to the second floor and two guards at its base. Something told him that the real party was not here below, but there, behind closed doors. He was about to come closer when he saw her. Claire. Her mask was silver, with delicate patterns reminiscent of a spider's web, but he recognized her by her gait, by the way she tilted her head while listening to her interlocutor. She stood at the window, talking to a woman in a green dress. John froze, his breathing became heavy. She looked confident, relaxed, as if this was not her first time here. He wanted to approach, but he was stopped by Mark, who appeared from the crowd. "Glad you came," Mark said, his mask dark blue with silver stars. His voice was friendly, but there was steel in it. "Come on, I'll show you what's what." John didn't want to follow him, but he knew he had no choice. Mark led him across the hall to that very staircase. The guards stepped back to let them through, and John felt his stomach tighten. They went up to the second floor, where the corridor was lit by dim lamps and the doors were closed. Mark stopped at one of them and turned to John. "This is where the real night begins," he said. "But first you have to understand that this is not just a party. It's a ritual, a way to be honest with yourself." John was silent, his eyes glued to the door. Mark opened it, and they entered a room where the light was soft, almost intimate. In the center, there was a long table, at which sat several masked people. John recognized Judge Walter. His posture, the way he held his glass, gave him away despite the mask. Sitting next to him was the woman John had seen on the news, a partner in a law firm. Other faces were hidden, but their presence pressed like heavy air before a thunderstorm. "Sit down," Mark said, pointing to a chair. John sat down, his hands on his knees, so that no one would notice how they were shaking. He felt eyes directed at him, but no one spoke. Judge Walter leaned forward, his voice low, almost hypnotic. "You are here because you were given a chance," he said. "But chance requires trust. Are you ready to trust us?" John wanted to answer, but his throat was dry. He nodded, although everything inside was screaming to run. Mark smiled and turned on the screen built into the wall. A video appeared on it, familiar but new. Claire, in the same bedroom he saw on the flash drive, but this time she wasn't just participating. She directed the camera, her voice, calm and confident, giving instructions. "Closer, slower, show her face." John felt the blood drain from his face. This was no accident, not blackmail. Claire was not a victim, she was a creator. "Your wife," Mark said, his voice almost sympathetic, "has been with us for a long time. She's not just a participant. She is one of the people who makes this possible. The notes are her idea. They keep us together and provide equality." John looked at the screen, but saw nothing but her face. Claire, his Claire, the woman he loved, who read stories to the children, who cried in his arms, she was the brain of this network. He remembered her words about freedom, her attempt to involve him, and realized that this was not a trick. She believed it. She wanted him to become the same. "Why?" he managed, his voice hoarse. Judge Walter responded, his tone almost fatherly. "Because the truth sets you free," he said. "We are all here to be who we really are. No masks, no lies. But the world outside does not accept the truth. That's why we protect her. Records are our insurance. They make us equal." John felt nauseous. Equal? It was a cage where each one kept the other on a chain, and Claire, his wife, was one of those who forged these chains. He looked at Mark, at the judge, at the others, and realized that they were not just people. They were something else, beings who shed their human form to satisfy their desires. The masks on their faces were ironic. They took off their real masks here, in these rooms, where morality, shame, conscience dissolved in twilight. "What do you want from me?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but there was a ring of steel in it. Mark leaned closer, his eyes sparkling. "We want you to become one of us," he said. "You already know too much. There's no turning back for you. But we're not enemies, John. We can give you everything: power, pleasure, security. Everything you saw outside accusations, rumors will disappear. Just say yes." John was silent. He thought about Claire, about the children, about his life, which now seemed like a mirage. He thought about Sarah Mills, about the incriminating evidence they had set up, about how quickly they had ruined his reputation. He knew that rejection would mean the end not just for him, but for Emma and Lucas as well. But consent meant the loss of himself, his soul, what still kept him human. "I need time," he finally said. His voice was even, but everything was burning inside. Judge Walter nodded as if he had expected this. "You have until the end of the night," he said. "But remember, we don't like to wait." Mark led him back into the hall, where the music became louder and the guests became more relaxed. John saw couples disappearing into the corridors, hands touching shoulders, glances becoming frank. He saw Claire, now in the center of the hall, her laughter ringing like a bell, but for John it sounded like a death knell. She was their queen, their priestess, and he, her husband, was just a pawn. He took more whiskey and went to the window, looking out at the dark street. His thoughts were chaotic, but one thing was clear: he couldn't be a part of this. Can't let them win. But how to get out? He knew the records were their strength. If he finds them, destroys them, he can destroy the network. But this meant betraying Claire, destroying her world, and maybe even herself. The night dragged on, and John felt time running out. He looked at the guests, at their masks, and realized that the real party was just beginning. And he must decide who he will be in this masquerade: a victim, a player, or the one who will tear off the masks from everyone. The night in Judge Walter's mansion left an emptiness in John's soul, like after a fire, when only coals remain from the house. He returned home in the morning. His suit smelled of someone else's perfume, and the mask thrown into the back seat of the car seemed to be a symbol of everything he had seen. Faces in masks, Claire's laughter, her confident voice in the video, Mark's words, the judges, all this mixed into a kaleidoscope that he could not make out. He sat in the living room, looking at the first rays of the sun breaking through the curtains, and felt that his life was split into before and after. There was only one question: what now? Claire returned later, her steps light, almost dancing. She entered the living room. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and her eyes sparkled, as if she had drunk not wine, but pure energy. She looked at John, who was sitting in a chair with a glass of water, and her smile was soft, but there was a hint of mockery in it. "Didn't sleep?" she asked, taking off her coat. "You look like you saw a ghost." John looked up, his eyes dark and tired. He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, trying to find in her face any hint of the woman he knew. But Claire, standing before him, was different: not a wife, not a mother, but someone who belonged to a world he could not understand. "I was there," he said finally, his voice hoarse but firm. "At your party." Claire froze, her hand reaching for her bag stopped. She turned to him, her eyebrows raised, but there was no surprise in her face, only mild curiosity. "How do you like it?" she asked, her tone almost playful. "Did you like it?" John felt anger boiling in his chest, but he controlled himself. He stood up, his movements slow, as if he was afraid that any sudden action would destroy the delicate balance. "I saw you," he said, "on video. You weren't just there, Claire. You were filming. You were in charge. It's your idea, right?" Claire was silent for several seconds, her eyes studying him as if she was deciding whether to play further. Then she smiled, but there was no warmth in that smile. "You dug deeper than I thought," she said, her voice calm, almost admiring. "Fine, let's talk. No lies." She sat cross-legged on the sofa. Her posture was relaxed, but there was a sense of strength in her. John remained standing, his hands clenched into fists. "Yes, it was my idea," she began, her tone as light as if she were talking about a new recipe. "Not from the very beginning, of course. When Mark and Rachel first invited me, I was shocked. But then I realized that this is freedom. Real. Not the one they write about in books, but the one you feel on your skin. I wanted more, and I offered to film. That makes us equal, John. No one can betray, no one can leave. It's like perfect balance." John looked at her, his throat tightening. Her words were not just a confession, they were a manifesto, a statement of who she had become. He tried to find even a hint of remorse in her voice, but there was only confidence. "Balance?" he asked, his voice trembling. "You call this balance? You sleep with other people's husbands, with women, film it, blackmail people, and you think this is freedom? Claire tilted her head, her eyes narrowed. "What do you know about freedom, John?" she asked, her tone sharper. "You live in your own little world, where everything should be correct, boring, predictable. Work, home, children, dinner on schedule. Do you think this is life? This is a cage. I'm tired of pretending that I have enough." Her words hit him like a slap in the face. He stepped closer, his voice getting louder. "Cage," he said. "This was our life, Claire, our family. Emma, Lucas, me. You gave it all up for. What? For parties? For the sake of power over judges and prosecutors." Claire stood up, her face now a few centimeters from his. She did not back down, her eyes were burning. "I didn't leave my family," she said. "I'm still here, John. I am a mother, I am a wife. But I don't want to be just that anymore. I want to be myself. And guess what? I like it. I like who I am now. I'm not going to stop." John felt his heart clench. Her words were not just a confession, they were a sentence. He looked at her, trying to find at least something from the Claire he loved, but he saw only a stranger. Her confidence, her passion for this new life was not just a choice, it was her essence. "You think I'm weak?" he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "Is it true?" Claire fell silent, her gaze softened, but there was no regret in it. "Yes," she answered. "You are weak, John. You cling to the past, to illusions. You cannot accept that the world is not the way you want it to be. You're boring, always was. I tried to pull you in, to give you a chance, but you're too cowardly to step over the edge." Her words cut like a knife, but John didn't look away. He felt the anger give way to something else, a cold, clear determination. He realized that it was impossible to return her. Not because she didn't want to, but because the Claire he knew no longer existed. She disappeared into this masquerade, this club, this network of lies and power. "Do you think this is strength?" he asked. His voice was even, but there was a ring of steel in it. "Blackmail people, manipulate them, film them like animals in a cage. It's not power, Claire. This is cowardice. You're afraid to be yourself without this network, without these masks." Claire laughed. Her laugh was harsh, almost cruel. "You don't understand anything," she said. "This is not about fear. It's about control. I control my life, my desires. And you can't even control your emotions. Look at you, John. You're broken. And do you know why? Because you can't accept the truth." "Is it true?" He stepped even closer. His voice became louder. "The truth is that you betrayed me. She betrayed our children. Do you think Emma and Lucas will be proud when they find out who their mother is? That she makes adult films with judges and prosecutors to keep them on a leash?" Claire winced, her face losing confidence for a second, but she quickly pulled herself together. "Don't you dare mention children," she said, her voice low and threatening. "They won't know anything. And you don't dare tell them, because then you will ruin their life. Is this what you want?" John fell silent, her words hitting home. He thought about children, about their smiles, about their innocence. He couldn't imagine how to explain to them that their mother was part of this nightmare. But he knew that he couldn't remain silent forever. "What are you going to do, Claire?" he asked. "Continue? Live in this swamp? What about me? What's wrong with me? Do you want me to join, or for me to disappear?" Claire looked at him. Her eyes were cold, but there was a shadow of doubt in them. "I wanted you to be with us," she said. "But you made your choice. If you are not with us, you are against us. And you know what that means. Threats." He smiled bitterly. "Are you like this now? Threatening your own husband?" "These are not threats," she replied. "This is reality. You've seen what we're capable of. Sarah Mills, your job, school. This is just the beginning. If you don't stop, it will get worse." John felt his hands shaking, not from fear, but from rage. He wanted to grab her, shake her, make her see what she had become. But he knew it was useless. She was too far away, in another world where he was a stranger. "I won't stop," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You can threaten, you can ruin my life, but I won't become a part of it. And I won't let you destroy everything we had." Claire looked at him, her face unreadable. Then you chose your own path, she said. Don't say I didn't warn you. She turned and went into the bedroom, leaving him alone. John stood, feeling the silence pressing on him. He realized that this was the end, not only of their marriage, but also of the illusions he had kept for so long. Claire was lost, not because she was pulled in, but because she chose this path. She loved him, this power, this freedom, this darkness. And he, John, was just a hindrance for her, a weak link that needed to be either subdued or eliminated. He sat down on the sofa, his thoughts clear but heavy. He knew he had to fight, but not with Claire. It was all over with her. He must fight this network, with Mark, with a judge, with everyone who held it in their hands. But how? He had neither evidence nor allies, only a flash drive, pictures and knowledge that could cost him his life. The dawn in the suburbs was deceptively peaceful. Thin streaks of light filtered through the curtains, falling onto the living room floor where John sat hunched over his laptop. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, his fingers nervously tapped on the table. The conversation with Claire, her cold confession, her look full of contempt, left an emptiness in him, but this emptiness was not defeated. She was fuel. John realized he couldn't just leave, couldn't let this network, Mark, the judge, Claire, destroy his life. He had to fight, not blindly, not with anger, but with a plan. And this plan began to take shape. After that night at Judge Walter's mansion, John realized that the key to their power was the records. The videos that Claire and others created were not just incriminating evidence, but the cement that held their system together. If he can get to these records, hack into their archive, he can turn the game around. But to do this, he needed someone who understood technology better than him. John wasn't a hacker. His knowledge was limited to basic internet research and a few password tricks. He needed a professional, and he knew that finding such a person in his position would not be easy. The first step was to escape surveillance. John suspected that he was being followed not only by Claire, but also by Mark's people. He noticed a black sedan that had appeared on their street a couple of times, and a stranger who had been smoking for too long near the park where the children were walking. He couldn't risk dating anyone openly, so he began to tread carefully, using an old phone he found in a box of Chicago items. It was a cheap model without the internet, but it was suitable for calls and messages. He bought a new SIM card from a store with cash so that he could not be traced. John remembered a guy named Toby whom he had crossed paths with in Chicago. Toby was a technician, a little strange, but a genius. They met when John was working for a marketing firm and Toby was setting up their servers. He was the type who could hack anything, but preferred to keep a low profile. John didn't know where Toby was now, but he had his old number. He sent a message. "This is John from Chicago. Need help. It's a complicated matter. I can pay." The answer came an hour later. "Where are you? Name the place." They agreed to meet at a cafe on the outskirts of Boston, in an area where no one from the club would look for John. The cafe was small, with shabby tables and the smell of over-roasted coffee. John arrived first, taking a table in the corner. He put on a cap and an old jacket so as not to attract attention. Toby appeared 10 minutes later, thin, with long hair pulled back into a messy ponytail and a backpack with wires sticking out of it. His eyes, hidden behind his glasses, were wary, but he smiled when he saw John. "You look like you're on the run," Toby said, sitting down. His voice was quiet, but there was a slight mockery in it. "That's true," John replied, without going into details. "I need your help. This is dangerous." Toby raised an eyebrow, but didn't back down. "Dangerous is mine," he said. "Tell me." John hesitated. Telling everything would put Toby in danger, but he had no choice. He started with the main thing, the network of influential people, the tapes, the blackmail, Claire. He didn't mention her name, calling her a contact, but described the system video, cameras, archive, which is most likely stored on a secure server. Toby listened without interrupting, his fingers tapping on the table as if he was already solving a problem. "Do you want to hack their server?" Toby asked when John had finished. "It's not easy, man. If they are as tough as you say, they will have serious protection. Plus, if they find out you're digging, you're screwed. I know, John said, but this is my only chance. If I get these recordings, I can use them against them. Toby leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowed. Use how? He asked. Do you want to blackmail them in return? Or turn it over to the cops? John hesitated. He hasn't yet decided what to do with the recordings. It was risky to hand them over to the police. The judge and prosecutor could hush up the case. Blackmail was closer to their rules, but John did not want to become the same as them. His goal was simpler: destroy the system and come out clean. I want them to lose power, he said, so that the records stop being their weapon. And then I'll leave. With children, I'll start again. Toby nodded, his face becoming more serious. Okay, he said. I'm in. But it will cost. And I need more information. Where is the archive stored? What type of server is it? Who administers it? Without this, I won't even start. John took the flash drive out of his pocket and handed it to Toby. Here is everything I have, he said. Videos, pictures, names. This is the beginning. Toby picked up the flash drive, his fingers moving quickly as if he was already imagining the code. He put it in his backpack and looked at John. Give me a couple of days, he said. I'll see what can be done. But John, be careful. If they are what you say they are not just watching. They are waiting for you to make a mistake. John nodded, feeling the weight on his shoulders become a little lighter. For the first time in weeks, he had an ally. But he knew Toby was right. A mistake could cost him everything. Returning home, John became even more careful. He avoided conversations with Claire, limiting himself to short phrases about children or household matters. She did not seem to notice his detachment or pretended to. Her life went on. Work, meetings, smiles that now seemed like a mask to John. He watched her, but not like before. Now he was looking not for evidence of her infidelity, but for information about the club. Where do they keep the archive? Who runs the servers? He knew that Mark, as a lawyer, was unlikely to deal with the technical side, but someone in their circle had to be the brains of the system. One evening, when Claire left for a meeting, John decided to take a chance. He knew that she often left her laptop in the bedroom, and although it was password protected, John noticed that she sometimes wrote passwords on sticky notes. He searched her desk and found a small piece of paper hidden under a book. It had a set of numbers and letters on it. John turned on the laptop, entered the password, and froze when the screen lit up. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he started with the folders. Most of them were empty or contained work files, library reports, event plans. But one folder, simply named 47, was encrypted. John didn't try to open it. He knew it would attract attention. Instead, he copied it to an external drive and sent Toby a message. Found something. Check. Toby responded a few hours later. This is serious. Encrypted to military standards. I need time. John felt his heart beat faster. He was close, but every step brought him closer to the abyss. Meanwhile, pressure from the club continued unabated. John received another letter from the school, this time about Emma's inappropriate behavior, although he knew it was a lie. His former boss called, hinting that rumors of violence had reached clients. John knew it was their doing. They were reminding him that he was under control. But he wasn't going to give up. 3 days later, Toby called. His voice was excited, almost feverish. I found their server, he said. It's in the cloud, but physically somewhere in Boston. They have an administrator, someone under the nickname the Overseer. I can hack him, but I need to get into their network. Physically, somewhere they connect. John thought about it. Building 47 was the most likely location, but it was almost impossible to get into. He remembered Mark and Rachel's basement, the camera, the hard drive. This could be an access point. I know the place, he said, but it's dangerous. Dangerous to me, Toby replied. Tell me the time. They agreed to meet in 2 days. John knew this was his last chance. If he can hack the archive, he will get records not only of Claire, but also of the judge, the prosecutor, everyone who ran this network. He could have handed them over to the FBI, the media, anywhere where they wouldn't be hushed up. But he also knew that it would make him a target, not only for the club, but also for Claire. At night, while Claire was sleeping, John sat in the living room, looking at a photograph of the children. Emma and Lucas were his anchor, his reason to fight. His mind was clear, his heart beating with renewed determination. He knew he was on the edge, but for the first time in months, he felt like he had a chance. The escape plan was risky, but it was his only path to freedom, not only for him, but for his children, for their future, which he vowed to protect. The darkness in the suburbs seemed thicker than usual, as if the night had thickened to hide what was about to happen. John sat in the car parked 2 blocks from Mark and Rachel's house, his fingers gripping the steering wheel. Nearby, in the passenger seat, Toby was fiddling with his laptop, his face illuminated by the bluish light of the screen. The plan was simple but risky. Break into the basement, connect to their network, and give Toby access to the server where the club's archive was stored. John knew that this was his last chance to destroy the system, but every step was like walking through a minefield. He didn't trust anyone, not even himself, but Toby, with his casual confidence, was the only one he could count on. "Ready?" Toby asked without taking his eyes off the screen. His voice was calm, but there was tension in it. John nodded, although his stomach was churning with anxiety. He checked his backpack, flashlight, tools, flash drive with the program Toby had prepared. They had to act quickly. Mark and Rachel were at another meeting, but John didn't know how much time they had. He got out of the car, Toby followed him, and they walked towards the house, keeping in the shade of the trees. The street was quiet, only the distant noise of cars disturbed the silence. John had been in the basement before, knew how to open the window, but now every rustle seemed like a threat. He felt that he was being watched, although he did not see anyone. Toby, on the other hand, looked almost relaxed, his backpack clinking slightly, but he moved silently, like a shadow. They reached the backyard. John crouched by the basement window, his fingers gently pressing against the frame. It gave way, just like last time, and he felt a slight relief. He crawled inside and Toby followed. The basement smelled of damp and dust, but the camera and hard drive were still there. Toby immediately took out his laptop and began connecting to the device. "Give me 5 minutes," he whispered. "If this is their access point, I can get in." John nodded, his eyes following the stairs leading into the house. He listened to every sound, but heard only the quiet hum of the laptop and the clicking of keys. Time passed agonizingly slowly, and with every second his nerves became more and more tense. He thought about Claire, about her words, about how she called him weak. These words burned, but they also gave him strength. He was not weak. He was here in the enemy's basement, ready to break their system. Toby suddenly froze, his face becoming more serious. "Damn," he muttered. "They updated the protection. This is not just a server, it's a labyrinth. I need more time." "How many?" John asked, his voice hoarse. 10 minutes, maybe 15. John felt his heart clench. 15 minutes in the basement is an eternity. But he nodded, realizing that it was too late to retreat. He went to the window to watch the street, but at that moment he heard a sound that made him freeze. Car. The tires crunched on the gravel and the headlights illuminated the yard. John crouched down, his breathing becoming ragged. "They're back," he whispered. "Toby, hurry up." Toby didn't answer, his fingers flying across the keyboard. John looked out the window and saw Mark and Rachel getting out of the car. But they were not alone. Claire was with them. Her silhouette, her gait, he would recognize her anywhere. His heart began to pound. She shouldn't have been here. Did she know? Or is this a coincidence? The door to the house slammed and voices came from above. John turned to Toby, his whisper almost panicked. "We need to leave. Now." "Just a minute," Toby replied, not looking up from the screen. "I'm almost in." John wanted to object, but at that moment the light in the basement flashed. He turned around and saw Claire standing on the stairs. Her face was cold, her eyes burned with rage. Mark stood behind her, his hand resting on the railing, and his smile was almost sympathetic. "John," Claire said, her voice was even, but there was steel in it. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" John froze, his thoughts racing. Toby looked up, his fingers stopping. Mark went down to the basement. His movements were slow, confident. "You made a big mistake," he said, looking at John. "We knew you were digging. But this is too much." John looked at Claire, trying to find any hint of regret in her face, but saw only determination. She betrayed him. Not just as a wife, but as a person he trusted. He felt his anger give way to cold clarity. "You told them," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You chose them." Claire tilted her head, her lips curling slightly. "I chose myself," she answered. "And you always chose illusions. I gave you a chance, John, but you chose to play the hero." Mark stepped closer, his eyes landing on Toby. "Who are you?" he asked. "New friend? Hacker, huh?" Toby was silent, his face unreadable. John knew he had to protect him, distract him. "It's my idea," he said, looking at Mark. "Leave him alone. He just does what I say." Mark laughed. His laugh was low, almost sinister. "Do you think it's that simple?" he said. "You're not just a threat, John. You're the problem now, and our problems are resolved quickly." Claire stepped forward, her voice cold. "I'll take him to Walter," she told Mark. "He'll figure it out." John felt his heart sink. Judge Walter, a man whose power in this network was absolute. He knew this was not just talk. This is the end. He and Toby were taken out of the basement and put into Mark's car. Claire sat in front, her gaze fixed forward, as if John did not exist. They drove in silence, only the noise of the engine breaking the silence. John looked out the window, his thoughts clear but heavy. He lost. Claire knew about his plan, perhaps from the very beginning. She had played him like a pawn, and now he was in their hands. They arrived at Walter's mansion, the same one where the party was taking place. The night was dark, but the windows glowed like the eyes of a predator. John and Toby were led into an office on the second floor, where the judge sat at a massive desk. His face was calm, almost benevolent, but his eyes betrayed cold calculation. "Sit down, John," Walter said, pointing to a chair. "Your friend can stand." John sat up, his hands on his knees to hide his trembling. Toby remained at the door, his face tense but silent. Mark and Claire stood behind, their presence pressing like a shadow. "You've caused us a lot of problems," Walter began, his voice soft but threatening. "We tried to be patient. They gave you a chance, but you decided to play against us, and now you're here." John looked at him, his throat dry. He knew that every word could be his last. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice level despite his fear. Walter smiled, his fingers clasped. "You have two options," he said. "First, you become part of us. Fully. We will give you everything: power, money, women, a life you never even dreamed of. Your problems will disappear. Sarah Mills, the rumors, your work, it will all be erased as if it never happened." "And the second?" John asked, although he already knew the answer. Walter leaned closer, his eyes narrowed. "You will disappear," he said. "An accident. Car accidents, drowning, whatever. Nobody will look. Your children will grow up with a mother who knows how to take care of them. And you simply won't exist." John felt his blood run cold. He looked at Claire, but she looked away. Her silence was louder than words. She agreed with this. She was ready to sacrifice him for her new life. "Why me?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Why can't you just leave me alone?" Walter leaned back in his chair, his smile widening. "Because you know too much," he said, "and you are not one of those who remain silent. You've already proven it. We can't take risks." John was silent, his thoughts racing. He thought about Toby, about the flash drive, about the server. If he agrees, he will lose himself. If he refuses, he will lose his life. But there was a third way to gain time, find a loophole, finish what he started. "Give me a day," he said finally. "I will think." Walter looked at Mark, then at Claire. She nodded, her face unreadable. "Okay," said Walter. "One day, but don't try to run, John. You know we will find you." They took him home, and Toby stayed with Mark for insurance, as Walter said. John sat in the living room, looking at the empty walls. He knew there was no time. Claire betrayed him, the club drove him into a corner, but he was not going to give up. He had to find a way to contact Toby, complete the hack, and use the recordings. This was his last double play, and he had to play it perfectly. The Peterson house, once their sanctuary, now seemed foreign to John, like a set for a movie he didn't want to star in. The moonlight penetrated through the cracks in the curtains, drawing bars like bars on the floor. John stood in the living room, his breathing heavy, his hands clutching an old kitchen knife that he had taken without thinking, simply because it was lying on the table. An hour ago, he received a message from Toby. "I'm on their network. Give me another hour, and the archive will be ours." But this hour could be the last. Judge Walter gave him a day, and that day was running out. The club knew he wouldn't give up, and John felt the noose tighten around his neck. Claire entered the house quietly, her heels barely clicking on the wooden floor. She stopped in the doorway of the living room, her silhouette clear in the twilight. She didn't turn on the light, and that was the first signal she knew he was here. She knew that this was not an ordinary night. Her bag slid off her shoulder, falling to the floor with a soft thud, and she stepped forward, her eyes sparkling like those of a predator sensing prey. "You're still here," she said, her voice low, almost mocking. "I thought you were going to run away. Or do something heroic." John didn't answer immediately. His fingers gripped the handle of the knife, but he held it at his hip, hiding it in the shadows. He looked at her, trying to see in her face at least a hint of the Claire he loved, but he saw only the woman who destroyed his world. Her words, her betrayal, her confidence that he was weak, burned him like acid. "I don't run," he said finally, his voice hoarse but firm, "and you know it." Claire smiled, her lips curling into a familiar, but now alien smile. She stepped closer, her movements slow, almost theatrical. "I know," she said. "You have always been stubborn. But that's not stubbornness, John. This is a weakness. You are clinging to something that is not there. For us. For the family. For your morals." She said the last word with slight contempt, and John felt anger flare in his chest. He took a step forward, the knife in his hand trembled, but he still did not raise it. Claire noticed the movement and her eyes narrowed, but she didn't back down. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Her voice became quieter, but a new note appeared in it, a challenge. "Kill me? Come on, John. Show that you have at least a little courage." Her words were like a blow from a whip. John froze, his breathing becoming ragged. He looked at her face, which had once been home for him, and felt like two people were fighting inside. One wanted to plunge a knife into her chest, the other wanted to throw it and leave. The knife was heavy, its blade gleamed dully in the moonlight, and John knew that one blow could end everything. Her betrayal, her ridicule, her new life, all this could disappear in an instant. But what then? Who will he become if he does this? "Do you think I can't?" he asked, his voice trembling, but there was steel in it. "Do you think I'm incapable?" Claire laughed. Her laughter was harsh, almost insane. She stepped even closer. Now only a few steps separated them. Her eyes were burning, but there was no fear in them, only confidence, almost triumph. "You're a weakling, John," she said, her voice as cold as ice. "You always have been. You can't even accept the truth, let alone do anything about it. Kill me. You can't even look me in the eye without remembering how happy we were. And do you know why? Because you still love me, even now." Her words cut deeper than he expected. John felt his knife hand rise, almost instinctively, but he stopped. His heart was pounding, blood was pounding in his temples. She was right, he still loved her, or at least loved the Claire she once was. But this woman standing in front of him was different. She was the poison that blighted his life, and he knew he couldn't let her win. "You're wrong," he said, his voice quiet but with new strength. "I'm not weak. And I don't love you. Not this you." Claire tilted her head, her smile sharpening. "Then do it," she said, her voice almost a whisper. Kill me, John. Free yourself. Or are you afraid? Are you afraid that without me you are nothing? She stepped even closer. Now they were separated by less than a meter. John felt her breath, her scent familiar, but now alien. The knife in his hand was as heavy as fate, and he knew that this was the moment of truth. One hit, and it's all over. Her ridicule, her betrayal, her power over him. But he also knew that it would make him just like them Mark, the judge, their entire network. Killing won't free him. It will bind him to them forever. You want me to do this, he said, his voice even, almost calm. You provoke me because you know that this is your only way to win. But I won't give you this victory. Claire looked at him, her eyes narrowed. For the first time in the entire conversation, uncertainty flashed through them. You won't leave, she said, but her voice was less confident. They will find you. Walter, Mark. You won't come out of this alive. John slowly lowered the knife, his fingers unclenching and the blade falling to the floor with a thud. He looked into her eyes, and in his gaze there was neither anger nor fear, only clarity. Maybe, he said, but I will leave on my own terms. Not on yours, and not on them. He turned and walked towards the door, his steps steady despite the trembling in his body. Claire didn't move, her breathing was heavy, but she didn't stop it. He felt her gaze, but did not turn around. He knew that this was the end not only of their marriage, but also of his illusions. Claire was lost, and he couldn't save her. But he could save himself and his children. Stepping outside, John breathed in the cold air, his lungs burning. He took out his phone and sent Toby a message. Do it. I'm ready. He knew that time was short. Claire is most likely already calling Mark or Walter to say that he refused. But John had no intention of running. He was going to fight. He got into the car and drove to the cafe where he first met Toby. It was safe there, at least for a few hours. He thought about the children, about Emma and Lucas, who were now sleeping with friends. He had to protect them, even if it meant destroying everything that connected him to Claire. The club archive was his only weapon, and he knew Toby was close to cracking it. If they get the tapes, they can give them to the FBI, to the media, anywhere where they won't be covered up. But John also knew that this would make him a target not just for the club, but also for Claire, who was now their loyal soldier. At the cafe, he ordered coffee and sat in the corner, his eyes watching the door. He thought about how it all began: the new house, Claire's smile, their hopes. Now it seemed like a dream that turned into a nightmare. But John had no regrets. He made a choice, and that choice was his strength. He did not become a killer, did not become part of their world. He remained himself, and that was more than they could take from him. An hour later, a message came from Toby. I'm inside. I have the notes. What's next? John smiled for the first time in weeks. He knew it wasn't a victory, but it was a step. A step towards freedom, towards truth, towards a life that he will build anew without Claire, without the club, without masks. He wrote back, give them to the FBI, anonymously, and disappear. Then he turned off the phone and looked out the window. The night was dark, but somewhere there, beyond the horizon, he saw light. And he knew that it would come to him, no matter the cost. John looked at his reflection in the muddy water of the pond, his face distorted by light waves, as if time itself was trying to erase his features. He stood on a lonely road several miles outside of Boston, his clothes soaked with sweat and dirt. The backpack contained only the essentials: a new passport, some cash, a flash drive with a copy of the archive, and an old phone that he used to contact Toby. The plan was risky, almost crazy, but it was the only way to escape the club's grip without leaving a trace. He had to die not for real, but for everyone who knew him. The idea of faking his death came to him that night after his encounter with Claire. Her words, "You're a weakling," echoed in his head, but they didn't hurt anymore. They became a challenge. He was not weak, and he would prove it by destroying their system from the inside. But for this, he needed to disappear, to become a ghost that no one would look for. Toby, with his genius and cynical view of the world, was the key to this plan. They met in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, where rusty beams and broken windows gave the illusion of abandonment. Toby sat at the folding table, his laptop surrounded by wires and the dim light of the screen illuminating his face. He looked tired, but his eyes sparkled with excitement. "You are sure?" Toby asked without looking up from his keyboard. "This is not just a game, John. If we do this, there will be no turning back." "I'm sure," John answered, his voice firm despite the cold in his chest. "They won't stop until they get to me. This is my only chance." Toby nodded and went back to work. The plan was complex, but feasible. John was supposed to die in a car accident plausible enough that no one would ask questions. Toby used his connections on the dark web to falsify CCTV footage and medical reports. They found an old car that Toby hacked to set it on fire on a deserted road. John left his things in it, a wallet, a phone, even some blood taken from a vein in advance. It must have looked like he lost control, crashed into a tree, and burned out. But that was only half the plan. The second part was more important, the club archive. Toby hacked their server, copying hundreds of videos, documents, and correspondence. This was dirt not only on Claire, Mark, and Judge Walter, but also on dozens of others, politicians, businessmen, even the priest from the local parish. John didn't want to blackmail them like they blackmailed each other. He wanted to destroy their system, exposing it to the world. "I'll send some of the notes to the FBI," Toby said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Anonymously, through several proxies. They won't be able to track it, but I can't guarantee that they will start digging. These guys have long arms." "Not all at once," John answered. "The main thing is to sow chaos. Let them begin to suspect each other and look for a traitor. This will give me time." Toby looked at him, his gaze a mixture of admiration and concern. "You have changed," he said. "Before, you were just a man who wanted to save his family. And now, you play by their rules." John didn't answer. He knew Toby was right. Something broke in him, not weakness, but illusions. He no longer believed in justice, in goodness, in the fact that the world could be corrected. But he believed in revenge and to freedom. The disaster was staged 2 days later. John watched from afar as the fire consumed the car, as the sirens of police cars cut through the night. He felt his old life burning away along with the metal, and it was both painful and liberating. The next day, the news reported the tragic death of John Peterson. Claire, Mark, the judge they all believed. John knew Claire wouldn't cry, but she might feel relieved. He was a threat to her, and now that threat is gone. Toby did his part. A week after John's death, anonymous leaks began appearing online. First, several videos where faces were blurred, but names were clearly mentioned. Judge Walter, the prosecutor, the businessmen, their reputations began to crack. Then documents surfaced on the darknet linking the club to offshore accounts and bribery of officials. The FBI began an investigation, although John knew it would be slow. Too many powerful figures were involved. But chaos has already begun. Club members panicked. Someone disappeared after going abroad. Someone ended up in the news with headlines about suicide. Mark disappeared without a trace. Rachel was found in her workshop with an overdose. Claire, according to rumors, had left Boston, but John did not know where. He didn't want to know. He himself was on the run. A new passport, a fake name Jacob Rivera, and a one-way ticket to South America. He chose a small town in Argentina where no one asked questions and life flowed slowly, like a river outside the window of his rented apartment. The money he saved and the money Toby helped withdraw through cryptocurrency allowed him to lay low. He wasn't rich, but he was free, or at least he thought so. The final scene of his new life began in a cramped bathroom where a cracked mirror reflected his face. John, or now Jacob, has changed. His hair was shorter, streaked with gray, which he did not dye. The beard he grew hid features that the entire Boston suburb once knew. But the changes were not only external. His eyes, once full of hope, were now hard, almost empty. He looked at his reflection and did not recognize himself. The man in the mirror was not a victim, not a hero, but something in between, a shadow that survived, but paid a price for it. He turned away from the mirror and sat down at the table where the old laptop stood. The screen glowed, showing the folder Toby had sent him before he disappeared. "You'll want to see this," he wrote. John opened the folder and his breath froze. There were new faces, new names, new entries on the screen. Not Boston, not the club, but another network, another web, where people with power and money played the same games as Walter, Mark, Claire. Before Toby disappeared, he left him the key not to freedom, but to a new game. John leaned back in his chair, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He could delete the folder, forget it, start his life again like Jacob Rivera, like no one else. He could become a farmer, open a cafe, raise children he hoped to one day take home. But he knew he wouldn't do it. The system he destroyed was just part of something larger, and this new folder was proof. She called to him, like the dark water into which he had already stepped once. He thought of Claire, of her taunt. "You're a weakling." She was wrong. He was not weak. But was he now part of the system he hated? Or has he become its new architect, the one who will rewrite the rules? His fingers touched the keyboard and he opened the first video. The face on the screen was unfamiliar, but John knew this was just the beginning. He smiled, not the smile he had in Boston, but a new one, cold as steel. There were papers, a map, and a new phone on the table. John, or Jacob, stood up, his shadow falling across the screen. He was no longer a victim. He was a player, and the game was just beginning. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.